I did my degree in computer science there.
Yeah.
And then worked in artificial intelligence in a graduate role. Then at Auburn did graduate work in software engineering, computer science. And then eventually got my doctorate with a minor in computer science. And in between there, working in software systems in the Air Force and on space systems, the whole gamut.
Yeah. So you lived through all kinds of changes in this technology from the beginning of your undergraduate years right on through to your doctorate.
That's exactly right. And that's why I'm here. That's why we're talking.
Yeah.
We're at this incredible computer history museum with all of the artifacts that show us the progression of this amazing technological revolution that's occurred.
Right.
And no one would question that.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the artifacts, we have the history, the historical statements, but when we move back to origins, and this is your expertise, we have artifacts and we have historical documents, but all of a sudden we have radically different opinions of what those artifacts and that history says.
Radically different. In fact, you're looking really at what are competing paradigms, a term that I first encountered as a 19-year-old art school dropout reading Thomas Kuhn's classic, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which revolutionized my own understanding of science. And you gain a vision from that book of science as a creative human enterprise where assumptions can't be escaped. And depending on the assumptions that you choose, you can end up with very different narratives. So we've got data, we've got evidence, we've got, in effect, artifacts, but those pieces of evidence are being interpreted in very different ways depending on the assumptions that one makes. So really, science isn't just about the evidence, it's about how you interpret that evidence. So these competing paradigms will put you in very different places depending on which one you're in.
So it comes down to paradigms.
Oh yeah. A paradigm governs really everything that you think about a particular subject. It provides this global framework. So this room, for example, we've got so-called mini computers here, but really they're not mini at all in terms of our current paradigm.
Yeah, today, right?
Yeah, this.
Yeah.
Right? So really, to understand this question of origins, you really need to begin by looking at the governing paradigms, the two major views that we currently have about the history of life and the history of the universe.
And what are those?
On the one hand, we have the conventional paradigm. This is the view that the universe began a long time ago in a very simple state, and by strictly physical processes developed gradually and continuously into all the complexity that we see today. Galaxies, stars, planets, cells, animals, human beings. It's one long continuous story from a very simple beginning to today. That's one view. The second view we can call, let's say, the historical Genesis paradigm. Strikingly different. First of all, you've got recency. Right? This is not happening over a very long time. It's happening relatively recently, and it begins in a state of functionality where it's working already. You've got organisms present, they're doing what they need to do. You've got planets and solar systems already operating, brought into existence, really within a very short span of time, simultaneously. Homo sapiens is present right there, right at the start. So those two views contrast really at every point, and their key features are also very different.
It's not hard to see there's a radical difference between those two in terms of time.
Right.
What else do you see is contrasted here between these two paradigms?
To me, the most striking difference is what kinds of causes are operating. So in the conventional paradigm, it's physics running the show. Physics through chemistry, influencing biochemistry and then biology. All the change that's happening is coming bottom up from fundamental, undirected, mindless physical processes. They're doing everything. In the historical Genesis view, underlying everything is mind, is intellect. A purposeful intelligence is bringing things into existence. That's a profound difference. Another key difference is the actual sequence of events. So in the conventional paradigm, you have a gradual process whereby things are constructed beginning on what came before. So ultimately, really, you start with, elementary particles, hydrogen and helium, the heavier elements, galaxies are formed, planets, and so forth, leading eventually to the first cell. It's a continual process of gradual transformation. With the historical Genesis paradigm, you have a transcendent intelligence, God acting in space and time to bring things into existence, in a sense, discontinuously. And that pattern gives you discrete events in space and time that aren't strictly flowing one from the other. So you have the creation, you have the fall, which is a catastrophic event that affects all of the creation in a radical way. So again, you see a striking difference in the narrative that one would tell depending on your starting point. And lastly, and maybe this is the most important, what is the whole of reality? Is it strictly physical? Are we, meat machines that will decay into nothing upon our death? Or is there a spiritual dimension to our existence that is eternal, that has eternal value? And really, that final point is the one I think that's most decisive, because it ends up affecting how we treat each other. And science is one thing, but our moral sense, our relationship with God, we can't have a relationship with God if we are strictly physical creatures. So finally, on that fourth point, you see the deepest difference between these two paradigms.
Well, Paul, what we've described here are two paradigms that really have very little similarity. They are almost light years, if you want to use the phrase, light years apart. And it seems to me that the result of that is also radically different in terms of how I see myself.
Exactly.
Who am I? All of those philosophical questions.
Right.
Why am I here? What's the purpose of life? Is there any meaning in all of this?
Right.
And the paradigm that begins with natural processes and ends with natural processes, it's hard to find meaning.
It's hard to find meaning. In fact, the very concept of a deeper meaning, a deeper purpose, has no purchase in that view. Because if you're ultimately particles in motion, when your particular bag of particles ceases to be in motion, it's over, right? That is not the view of historical Genesis, where you are created, yes, as a physical object, but there is more to you than just your particles. In fact, there's infinitely more. And so really, the difference ramifies out into every aspect of human life, which is why this question of origins is so important. It's not just a scientific matter. It's not just a scientific debate.
But it seems to me that the evidence that we have here is available to both of these paradigms if you just look at the physical evidence.
The physical evidence is a common body of data that both views draw on and interpret, but they're taking from that common body of evidence very different meanings. They're going in very different directions. It's a bit like having a crime scene where you've got two detectives and they've got the same patterns, right? One guy says it's this, the other says it's that. They're going in quite different directions away from the same body of data.
And it seems that they're going in different directions because one paradigm is listening to a witness telling you the story of what happened.
Yeah, I like that.
Versus the other one who's just looking at the physical data.
Right.
Because isn't that what we have in the historical Genesis paradigm?
We have a witness to those events. And that witness is telling us this is what happened, and we have to take that into consideration when we evaluate the data.
Well, that brings me to an issue I know that you've heard often, and I want us to look at this for a second, because one of the strong accusations against those who hold to a historical Genesis paradigm is that it's not based upon science. But that can't be true. Doesn't this paradigm also look at the reality of the physical evidence?
Oh, of course it does. The problem with that objection, which I'm familiar with, is it's smuggling into the word science an assumption, and When someone says, well, you're not looking at it scientifically, what they're presupposing or smuggling in is you're only allowed to use physical processes. But you couldn't live a single day thinking that way. Every time you get a text on your phone, you know, someone leaves a note in your car door when they bump your car in a supermarket parking lot. Normal human life depends on our ability to detect the action of intelligence. And we don't collapse intelligence into strictly physics. So if a scientist tells me I'm not allowed to use intelligent design to understand or explain the world, I ask him, how do you get through your day? Right? Because you're doing it all the time, very reliably. Science in its deep sense, its original usage in Latin meant knowledge. We know that Stonehenge was constructed by an intelligence. That conclusion will be true when our current theories of physics are long gone. So these inferences to intelligence are very robust, they're strong, and they're fully rational. So I think that the objection that you mentioned is really misdirected, and it's question-begging.
Yeah. Well, Paul, just as we're standing here in this computer history museum, no one would say that all of this amazing technology just simply arose as a result of physical processes. We wouldn't do that.
Right.
We know that an intelligent being, we saw the pictures of all of those amazing people who each added their own intelligence as a part of this process, and yet, what we're dealing with is a paradigm that is not willing to accept that.
It's a funny thing about the use of intelligence in explanation. It would be profoundly irrational to say that these devices self-assembled. In fact, no one would say that because it's simply not true. But when we come to things like the origin of life, the origin of the first cell, the origin of humankind, there, the agent in question, the intelligence in question, wouldn't be a member of our species, Homo sapiens. So suddenly the temperature in the room goes way up because the implications for saying the first cell was caused by a mind suddenly involve things that look a lot like theology. And it becomes a much more difficult question for people to evaluate objectively, which is why these questions of origins, as I said a moment ago, aren't really simply scientific questions. They spill over at every point into theology, into philosophy, into these deep questions of who am I, why am I here, where am I going? So I think in many cases for scientists, they function with a split personality. They would say, yeah, a mini computer had to have a designer. Yeah. I ask, how about a eukaryotic cell? Vastly more sophisticated in its engineering, if you will, than any of the devices we've looked at. Now, that hypothesis of design that was rational for the mini computer suddenly becomes problematic, not because of the evidence, but because of what it entails, what it implies about the universe.